the moment my son-in-law stood up at that dinner table and told me, in front of my own daughter, her two brothers, my sister, and 11 other people I'd known for decades, that I didn't understand how real money works. I made a decision. I didn't say a word. I poured myself more water, set the pitcher down carefully, and smiled at the woman across from me, who was pretending to be very interested in her bread roll. But I had already decided. I just hadn't moved yet. My name is Kenneth Briar. I'm 58 years old. I spent 26 years as a licensed structural engineer, built my own consulting firm out of a 2-room office in Columbus, Ohio, grew it to a team of 19, and retired early enough that people still ask me what I do for fun. I tell them I fish. That's not entirely true, but it's the answer that ends conversations politely. My daughter is Melissa. She's 34. She has her mother's eyes and, for most of her life, her mother's patience. She married Owen 3 years ago at a venue in Asheville that I paid for, in full, without being asked twice. Owen is 37. He sells commercial real estate in Charlotte. He is good at it, or at least good enough to believe that being good at it makes him an authority on everything adjacent to money, property, construction, investing, and the general movement of the world. I want you to understand who I was before that dinner, so you understand what I did after it. I am not a man who makes scenes. I have never raised my voice at a family event in my life. I coached Melissa's soccer team for 4 seasons. I drove her to college orientation, helped her move 3 apartments, and showed up to every graduation, every promotion dinner, every birthday she ever had, without being asked and without complaint. When her mother, my ex-wife Sandra, remarried and moved to Phoenix, I made sure Melissa always had someone in her corner in Ohio. I was that person. Quietly, consistently for 34 years. Owen knew this. He had been told this, by Melissa, by her brothers, by my sister Connie, who once said to him directly at Thanksgiving that Kenneth is the kind of man you want in your life, so don't be an idiot. He'd laughed. I'd laughed. We'd all laughed. That was 2 years before the dinner. The dinner was held at my son Roger's house in Dublin, Ohio. Roger is 40, my oldest. He and his wife Pamela host a family gathering every year around the 3rd week of October. It's not a holiday. It's just something they started doing after the kids were born, a way to get everyone together before the holidays get complicated. I had been to every one of these dinners. 8 of them now. I drove up from my place in Lancaster, brought a case of good wine, and walked in the same way I always had, like a man who belonged there because he did. Owen and Melissa arrived about 20 minutes after me. Owen walked in with the energy he always carries, which is the energy of a man who has just come from somewhere more important and is doing you a favor by, showing up. He shook hands with Roger, kissed Pamela on the cheeks, clapped my younger son Derek on the shoulder, and found me by the kitchen island. Kenneth. He always called me Kenneth. Never Ken. Never Dad, which some sons-in-law do and some don't. Owen had been asked once early on what he preferred and he'd said Kenneth, which I respected. The name was fine. It was the way he said it that had started to change. Good drive up, I asked. Not bad. 65 minutes. You? About the same. We did that for a while, the comfortable small talk of 2 people who don't have a great deal to say to each other, but have learned to perform the ritual without obvious discomfort. Melissa came over, squeezed my arm, told me I looked good. I told her she looked happy. She did, mostly. There was something behind her eyes sometimes that I couldn't name, but I'd been watching it for about a year, and I hadn't said anything yet. I wasn't sure it was mine to name. Dinner was good. Pamela does a short rib that I've tried to replicate and never quite matched. The table was full, 14 people including the grandchildren, who ate early and went upstairs with the teenager next door, who Roger paid to watch them. The adults settled in, the wine moved around, and the conversation did what family conversation does. Drifted between topics, circled back, occasionally landed somewhere interesting. The topic that landed us in trouble started, as these things often do, innocuously. Roger mentioned that a house 2 streets over had sold for significantly more than the asking price. He was surprised. Pamela pointed out that the whole neighborhood had been trending upward. Derek said something about how crazy the Columbus market had gotten in the last 2 years, and Owen, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, decided to explain why. He explained for a while. Confidently, thoroughly, in the way people do when a topic has given them permission to be the expert in the room. Interest rates, inventory, migration patterns from larger metros, the particular draw of the Columbus Tech corridor, all of it was accurate enough. I nodded along. Roger asked a few questions. Derek looked mildly glazed over, which was his normal expression during Owen's explanations. And then Owen said, "The problem with a lot of people who got into property before the last decade is that they built equity the old way and they think that's still how it works. The fundamentals have shifted. You have to understand leverage differently now. You have to think about cash flow in a way that, honestly, a lot of the older generation just wasn't trained for." The table didn't exactly go quiet, but it shifted. Roger looked at his plate. Derek reached for his wine. Pamela found something in the kitchen that needed her attention for a moment. I said, "What do you mean by the old way?" Owen looked at me with the slight patience of a man explaining something to someone he's already categorized. "I just mean the buy and hold, sit-on equity approach. It works, but it's not how you build real wealth in the current market. You have to be more active, more strategic. It's not about what the property does in 20 years. It's about what it does for your liquidity right now." "I see," I said. "No offense," he said, "in the way people say no offense when they have already committed fully to the offense. It's just a different framework. The way a lot of guys your age were taught to think about assets, it made sense then. The environment's just different." I looked at Melissa. She was cutting her chicken. She had heard. She was choosing to cut her chicken. "Sure," I said. "Makes sense." I poured myself more water. The conversation moved on. Roger redirected it to something about the kids' school. I listened and nodded, and finished my dinner, and said very little for the rest of the evening. But I had already decided. Here's what Owen didn't know, because Melissa hadn't told him, and I had never brought it up in a way that invited discussion. At the time of that dinner, I owned 11 properties. Not my primary residence. 11 separate investment properties, 7 in Central Ohio, 2 in Tennessee, 2 in the Florida Panhandle. I had acquired them over 22 years. A mix of long-hold residential rentals and commercial spaces, structured through an LLC I'd formed in 2004 with the help of a very good CPA and a real estate attorney who had been my colleague before she became my advisor. The portfolio had a combined appraised value that would have surprised Owen considerably. It generated monthly cash flow. It had been operating, quietly and profitably, since before Melissa graduated high school. I had never talked about it at the dinner table, not because I was hiding it, because I was raised in a house where you didn't discuss money at dinner. My father's rule. I'd kept it. Owen had been explaining financial fundamentals to a man who had been building quietly for 2 decades, and he'd done it in front of my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren's babysitter who could probably hear from upstairs. I said nothing that night. I said nothing on the drive home, either. I had my phone connected to the car audio, and I put on a podcast I'd been meaning to finish, and I listened to it, and I thought about what I was going to do next. Not in anger, in clarity. There's a difference between the two, and I have spent most of my adult life learning to tell them apart. The thing about being dismissed by someone you've been generous with is that it arrives quietly and then all at once. That dinner was the all-at-once moment. But the quiet part had been building. Owen had made a comment at Melissa's birthday dinner 8 months earlier about my retirement being good timing, before everything automated the engineering side anyway. I'd let it go. He'd made a comment at Derek's housewarming about the Lancaster property market being a good place to park value if you don't mind slow growth. I owned 2 properties in Lancaster. I'd let that go too. He'd told Pamela, at a separate event that Roger relayed to me later with visible discomfort, that Kenneth did well for a guy who came up in a pre-digital industry. I had let that go. You can let things go for a long time. The letting go is not weakness. The stopping is also not weakness. It's just a different kind of decision. The week after the dinner, I called my real estate attorney, Barbara Finch. She'd been handling my portfolio since 2007, sharp and methodical, the kind of person who documents everything and forgets nothing. "I want to review the succession structure on the LLC," I said. "What are you changing?" "I want to make sure the ownership is exactly what I intend it to be. No assumptions." A short pause. "This about the son-in-law?" Barbara had met Owen once at a closing briefly. She is very good at reading a room even secondhand. It's about clarity, I said. I'll pull the documents. Come in Thursday. I came in Thursday. We sat down with the full portfolio. I had set things up years ago in a way that was already fairly protected, but there were places where assumptions had been made, places where spousal interest claims could theoretically be argued in certain scenarios. Not because I'd planned to protect against Melissa specifically, but because I'd never been precise about the structure in ways that foreclosed questions. I got precise. We updated the operating agreement. We made sure the beneficiary designations were explicit. It took 2 sessions and approximately 4 hours of billable time that I considered the best money I'd spent in years. You feel better? Barbara asked when we wrapped the second meeting. I feel accurate, I said. That's usually better than better. I did not tell Melissa any of this. I did not tell Roger or Derek. I did not change my behavior at family events. I showed up to Thanksgiving at Sandra's sister's place in Cincinnati. I bought the grandchildren Christmas gifts with the same care I always had. I had dinner with Melissa and Owen in Charlotte in February. At a restaurant Owen chose, and I sat across from him and talked about the Bengals and a documentary I'd watched about bridge engineering and the drive down I-71, and I was cordial and present, and gave him absolutely nothing to interpret as a shift. Owen would not have noticed a shift anyway. That was part of the problem. He had categorized me years ago, and the category was comfortable for him. It didn't require updates. The thing that moved everything forward wasn't anything I planned. It came from outside. In late March, my CPA forwarded me an inquiry he'd received from a property management company based in Cincinnati that was looking to acquire a portfolio of Central Ohio rentals. They'd heard my LLC name through a mutual connection in the industry. They were serious buyers. The numbers they were discussing, even as a preliminary range, were significant. I didn't respond immediately. I thought about it for 3 weeks, running the numbers, talking to Barbara, pulling comparable sales. What I eventually decided was not to sell everything, but 2 of the Columbus properties, both residential fourplexes I'd been managing through a property manager for 6 years, had reached a valuation point where the sale made structural sense for tax purposes and for reinvestment into something I'd been watching in the Tennessee market. I moved forward. The closing happened in May. It was not a secret. I didn't announce it, but it wasn't hidden. My CPA filed everything properly. My name was on the public record, as it always is with real estate transactions. Roger found out through the Columbus Business First real estate transaction listings, which he reads every week because he works in commercial lending. He called me on a Wednesday evening, mildly stunned. Dad, were those your properties? 2 of them? Yes. That's a significant number. It was a good time to sell those 2. Silence. Then, how many do you have? 11, down to 9 now. Another silence longer. Melissa doesn't know this, does she? It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a son doing math in his head and arriving somewhere uncomfortable. Melissa knows I have investment properties, I said. We've never had a detailed conversation about the portfolio. Owen told her at Easter, you were probably going to need to think about liquidating assets in the next few years, because the passive management approach wasn't competitive long-term. I sat with that for a moment. Is that right? I didn't know how to tell you. You just did. Thank you. I thanked Roger and got off the phone, and I sat in my kitchen for a while in the particular quiet of a man who has just had something confirmed that he already suspected. Owen had been telling my daughter that her father's financial life was a slow deterioration. He had been positioning himself, probably without fully realizing he was doing it, as the person in the room who understood these things, which meant positioning me as the person who did not. And Melissa had been hearing this, probably for longer than I knew, and had not said anything to me about it. That second part was the part that stayed with me longer. I didn't call Melissa that week, or the next. I wasn't punishing her. I was giving myself time to be sure that what I said when I did call was exactly what I meant, and nothing more. She called me first, in early June. There was something in her voice immediately, a guardedness I recognized. I heard the Columbus properties sold, she said. 2 of them, yes, Roger told me. Okay. A pause. Dad, I didn't know the portfolio was that. I mean, I didn't realize the scale. You never asked. The pause this time was different. Longer. Waited. Owen said he thought you were probably— I know what Owen said, Roger told me. Another pause. Then, quietly, why didn't you ever say anything? And this was the question I had been sitting with. The honest answer was the one I gave her. Because it wasn't relevant until someone decided to make it relevant. I don't talk about money at the table, Melissa. Your grandfather's rule. I kept it. But somewhere along the way your husband decided to talk about mine, and you let him. Silence. Dad, I'm not angry at you. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you what happened, because I think you deserve to know what I've been sitting with. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I should have said something. At Roger's dinner. Yes, I said. You should have. I didn't soften that, not because I wanted it to land hard, but because the soft version of it wasn't honest, and she deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort in that moment. We talked for another 20 minutes. About some things. Not everything. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning of something that would take longer. What happened next I did not anticipate. Melissa talked to Owen. I don't know everything that was said. I know the result of it because Owen called me 3 days later, and Owen almost never called me directly. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. Kenneth, it's Owen. I'd like to talk when you have a chance. I think I owe you something. I listened to that message twice. Then I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and went outside and walked the property for a while, which I do when I need to think clearly. I have a small lake on the Lancaster property. Nothing dramatic, but it's quiet in the way that very few things in life are still quiet, and I've learned to use it. I thought about calling him back that day. I thought about what the old version of me would have done. The version who drove up to every dinner with a case of wine and shook hands, and found ways to bridge gaps that weren't mine to bridge. He would have called back same day. He would have made it easy for Owen to feel forgiven. He would have folded the whole thing back into the fabric of family and let it disappear. I waited 5 days. When I called Owen back, he answered immediately. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Not chastened exactly, more like a man who had recently walked into a room he thought was empty and found it was not. Kenneth, thanks for calling back. Of course. A short silence. Melissa and I have talked, a lot, actually, and I've been thinking about things I said. At Roger's dinner, and before that, okay, I was out of line, he said. What I said about the older generation and the way I characterized, I was out of line. I'm sorry. I gave him a moment to let it sit. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. I meant it. I know you did. I paused. I want to be honest with you, Owen. The same way you're being honest with me. An apology means something when it costs the person giving it something real. I don't know what this one cost you yet. But I'm watching, and I'm willing to see. He didn't say anything immediately. I could hear him processing that. That's fair, he said finally. I think so too. We talked a few minutes more. Practical things. A plan to get together in July. Nothing resolved in the way a movie would resolve it, with music and a handshake and the sense that the lesson has been learned completely. That's not how real things work. Real things work slower and less cleanly, and the proof is in what comes after, not what gets said in one phone call. What I will tell you is what came after. Owen stopped making comments about my financial life. He stopped, at family dinners, positioning himself as the person in the room who knew things that older men didn't. Whether this came from genuine reflection or from the discovery that the man he'd been dismissing had a portfolio that made his commission income look like a rounding error, I don't know. I didn't ask. The behavior changed, and the reason was his business. Melissa and I started talking differently. Not dramatically. Not with some emotional breakthrough scene. Just more honestly. She started asking questions about the property, about how I'd built the LLC, about the decisions I'd made over the years. She's smart, and she's curious, and she'd been listening to one person's version of her father for a while. When she got the other version, she knew what to do with it. In September, 8 months after the dinner at Roger's house, I was at a property management conference in Columbus. 2 days, industry contacts, the kind of event I'd been attending for 20 years. On the second afternoon, I ran into a man I knew vaguely through the investment community, a commercial developer named Ted Warshaw, who moved in overlapping circles. We were standing near the same table at the afternoon session, and he introduced me to the man next to him. It was Owen's broker, the man who ran the Charlotte commercial real estate office where Owen worked. I had not planned this. These things don't announce themselves. We shook hands. His name was Preston Cole. He was pleasant, professional, clearly good at what he did. We talked for a few minutes about the Ohio market and the conference content, and then Ted said something that required me to pay close attention to my own face. Preston's office has been trying to break into the Ohio investment property market for a couple years, Ted said. They've been looking for the right local connections. Preston nodded. The residential investment side especially. We have commercial clients who want to diversify. We just haven't found the right network yet. I looked at Preston Cole for a moment. I might know a few people, I said. I gave him my card. He gave me his. We agreed to have a follow-up call. I did not tell Owen about that conversation. I did not mention it to Melissa either, not because I was building something against Owen. I wasn't, but the timing was what it was, and I understood something about timing after 22 years of watching markets move. Whether anything comes from that connection is still being decided. I'm in no hurry. I have learned, over a long time, that the right moves are rarely the fast ones. That what looks like patience from the outside is often just a man who knows what he's building toward. Here's what I want to say about all of it, now that it's settled enough to say clearly. The dinner at Roger's house wasn't the moment everything changed. It was the moment I stopped pretending a change wasn't necessary. There's a difference. I'd been accommodating a version of myself that other people found comfortable for a long time. The version who brought the wine and didn't discuss the portfolio and stayed quiet when someone talked past him. That version served a purpose once. It doesn't serve one anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't issue an ultimatum. I didn't storm out of a dinner or book a flight or send a dramatic text. What I did was get precise. I made sure the things I'd built were protected, the way they should have been protected years earlier. I let the facts exist on their own terms, in the public record, where they'd always been, where anyone could have found them if they'd been looking with the right kind of attention instead of the wrong kind of certainty. Owen wanted to believe I was a man who had aged past the point of relevance. That story was useful for him. I didn't argue with it. I just stopped supporting it. Melissa asked me once, earlier this year, why I'd never pushed back in real time, why I'd sat through all of it without saying anything. I told her the truth. Because I didn't need to. Everything I'd built was still there whether I said anything or not. The only thing arguing would have done was make me feel better for 5 minutes and cost me credibility for much longer. She thought about that. That's very calculated. Your grandfather called it patient, I said. I think he was right. She laughed. First real laugh we'd had together in a while. I held on to it. I still go to Roger's dinner every October. I still bring the wine. I still sit at the same table with the same people and talk about things that are easy to talk about and let the harder things sit underneath the conversation where they belong, available if anyone wants to reach for them, invisible if they don't. Owen pours my water now. I haven't said anything about it. I don't need to. Some things communicate themselves without requiring words. That's what 26 years of engineering teaches you. The structure doesn't announce itself. It just holds.